Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, based on where you're logging in from. So it's great to have all of you here. I look forward to a fantastic session. Now, this session is all about a topic that is absolutely dreaded as far as GMAT critical reasoning is concerned. This topic is, of course, Bullface. So let's understand where you guys are with regard to Bullface. On the chat, let's get to know each other a little better. Why don't you tell me who you are, where you're from, and in general, what is your relationship with Bullface? Do you love Bullface? Do you hate Bullface? If yes, why? If no, why not? Tell me all about your problems with Bullface. That's something that we want to know. Meanwhile, while those responses register in, that's also my way of knowing who all are here in the session, getting to know you guys a little better. So while those responses come in, let me introduce myself. My name is Harsha. I'm one of the subject matter experts here at EGMAT, and I kind of specialize in critical reasoning and reading comprehension, also a little bit of sentence correction and a bit of quant. Now, I'm going to be your main host for today's session, and with me, I have Kanupriya. Kanupriya is a senior verbal expert, and throughout in this session, if there is something that I miss out, if there's a question that you put on the chat which I'm not able to take because I've moved on, Kanupriya will be helping me with handling those. We also have Sandeep here with us to help us with all the logistical aspects of today's session. So great welcome to all of you guys. Let's hear about you and Bullface. Let's hear a little bit about you. Let me know before we begin. Hey Pooja, welcome to the session. So Bullface is that one section, that one question type that a lot of people have problems with, and rightly so. We'll discuss that. And there's a reason why I say that it's the key to a 99th percentile GMAT verbal score, because typically a lot of Bullface questions do fall under the hard category. So if you're aiming for that kind of score, you want to do well in Bullface. Hey Suryavamsi, tell me a little bit about how you guys are with regard to Bullface as well, and then let's begin. That's a nice name, Billion Dollar Baby. Welcome to today's session. I hope the session is useful for you. Hey Rishabh, below average in Bullface. Good to see you here. Um, so, all right. So, yeah, Bullface in general is a section that I see a lot of us do have problems with. Uh, so, typically, what I see is, and yeah, Suryamsi, you're absolutely right. This is the most challenging question type for a lot of us. And there is a reason for it. I'm going to discuss that very briefly. So, if I talk about Bullface as a question type, typically students have a love-hate relationship with Bullface. There are some of us who absolutely love it, and there are some of us who absolutely hate it. So let's talk about the haters first. Now, typically the reason some of us are not very comfortable with Bullface, do not like Bullface, is because honestly Bullface questions are difficult. Now, if you actually go and take your OG 2020, for example, and if you look at the Bullface questions that you would see there, around 70% of them fall under the hard difficult category. So, needless to say, these questions are in general considered difficult. Another aspect of Bullface that makes it very tricky, they take longer to solve. Firstly, your Bullface arguments are lengthy. There's a lot more statements than your typical CR arguments. And you also have to figure out what exactly is the author's conclusion, because there are so many conclusions, so many other viewpoints, opinions floating in that argument. So all these factors make Bullface somewhat longer to solve. And finally, Bullface is like reading comprehension. Bullface is a GMAT killer. It can kill your GMAT, especially if you're not comfortable with it. If you see it in your second or third or even fourth blocks, by that time, when you're seeing a Bullface question, it can upset your rhythm if you do not have a solid method to tackle Bullface. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, there are people who absolutely love Bullface. I'm one of them, for example. Now, why do people love Bullface? One reason is you don't have to go outside the argument to get an answer. With regard to Bullface, if you're looking at assumption questions, for example, you need to find some underlying gap that's not explicitly given. With weakeners or strengtheners, you need some new information to strengthen. You have to go outside the box. Boldface, on the other hand, everything you need to solve the question is right there. That is one aspect that's lovely about Bullface. Another aspect that makes Bullface very interesting is if you can master Bullface, it will help you with all the other question types, at least some of them. For example, all argument based question types, assumption, strengthen, weaken, evaluate, you will see that you will get better at them. You'll be able to understand what the author is really trying to do, author's intent, the intended logical structure. You will gain a lot by mastering Boldface. This will have a tangential impact on how you perform in these other question types. One more thing, it will actually help in your RC. If you can master Boldface, you will actually see your RC also improve, because again, you will see how ideas connect with each other. That's a very core component of RC as well. And of course, Boldface can take time, but if you have a solid method, it does not have to take that much time. And that's what we're going to deal with today. So one thing that I really want to do today is, those of you who are here, I want to bring you into this category. At least try to do that in this 1 hour, 1 hour, 15 minutes. Okay. Good to see that. Let me see a few more comments. Meanwhile, Saurabh says my print problem is keywords given the option. Yeah, there are always terms in Boldface. Absolutely. Let's assume the keyword is a claim and the conclusion. Then I get confused because sometimes they are correct and sometimes they're wrong. Absolutely. That's why Bullface is not easy. So this session should give you a little bit of clarity on how to go about it. All right. So what is it that we are here to do today? We're going to explore Bullface. I have 3 specific goals. One, again, it's very important to understand what are the core skills that Boldface is actually testing you on. At EGMAT, we kind of believe that blind practice does not help. You need to develop certain skills. So Boldface requires you to develop certain skills. If you have those in abundance, then your Boldface is easy. Otherwise, it's difficult. So I want to give you an understanding of what these core skills are with regard to Boldface. And of course, as promised, I'm going to introduce to you a method to solve Boldface questions. Even the difficult ones, it's a solid process. And of course, if we have time, we will delve into a 700 level question. I'm going to illustrate how the method works on a 700 level question as well, once you solve it. So that's what we're here to do today. Now, structure is very simple. Bear with me for the first 10 minutes. I'm going to introduce core skills. You need to understand what these skills are, so that when you solve a Boldface question, if you falter, you will know which skill you need to master, which skill you need to work on. So this portion is a little bit of theory. It's important. After that, in total, we are going to do 7 questions today. You'll have these 5 warm-up questions. There are like mini questions based on Boldface arguments. Then I'm going to introduce the method through a question, one full-length question. And yes, if time permits, we will do one more question, which is an application. Again, an illustration of how the method really works. So I hope you guys are looking forward to it. Now, let's get into what I mean by core skills. And again, do pay attention at this point. Okay. So what exactly are core skills? Now, if you're talking about the GMAT as an exam, a lot of us walk into the GMAT with a certain mindset. Okay, there are some concepts being tested. If I talk about critical reasoning, for example, yes, I need to know what an assumption is. I need to know conceptually what is meant by the must be true characteristic. Conceptually, you should know how to apply the negation test. Those are concepts. So a lot of us walk into GMAT preparation with the mindset that I'll learn the concepts and then I'll practice, and do a ton of practice. And that will get me to the promised land. Now, of course, this works for some of us. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it definitely works for some of us. But here's the problem. It only works for some of us. This is a small micro minority of people for whom this approach actually works. And a lot of students who come to us are people who have exhausted every single official source that's out there and still not got their target score. And then they come to us and ask us, okay, why is it that we are not getting our target score? The reason is this: the GMAT is actually not something that you can just solve by brute force practice. That does not work for everyone. The GMAT is a test of certain fundamental skills. Now, some people, maybe because of the work that they have done, maybe because they're used to the kind of language that the GMAT uses, multiple reasons. Some people already have these core skills at some level or the other. For these people, just brushing off the concepts and practicing a ton of questions will bring them to that required level. But that's not all of us. For most of us, actually, these core skills need to be built. I'll give you one example: the ability to draw inferences, right? When you see a sentence, how many of us have the habit of drawing inferences and drawing the implications, the implicit implications from that sentence? Now, that's a very, very important skill. across critical reasoning, across verbal, and I will also say this, it's also an important skill in your quant. You're not going anywhere in GMAT without the ability to draw inferences. Now, some people are extremely strong at this naturally, some people have to build the skill. So remember, the GMAT is a test of core skills. Now, let's talk about what are these core skills in the context of critical reasoning, because that's what you're here for. We are in a CR session, right? So, we've kind of broken this down at EGMAT into the constituent parts, the various skills that actually make up critical reasoning, right? We already talked about the ability to draw inferences, whether it is from a single sentence, the ability to draw combination inferences. When you read three sentences, are you able to understand what can be inferred from those three sentences? That's a skill. Your ability to comprehend meaning at a basic level. Now, this is of course very, very basic. If you cannot comprehend what is being given to you, then and your entire GMAT is going for a toss. So it's a very basic level skill set that you need to build. Now, you can talk about the ability to visualize sentence. This is an advanced level of comprehension. For those of you interested, I did do a session on this in November on this very channel. You can check it out. But essentially, when I say visualization, are you able to form a picture of what you're reading as you're reading it? It's not just that you're reading it, your brain is forming that picture. In other words, would you be able to explain it to your friend without looking at the text? Have you really absorbed the information? Now, this is a skill that can take you to that 700 level and above. So that's one thing. CR is a lot about these two abilities, your ability to understand logic. After all, CR is all about logic. Critical reasoning, you're talking about an argument, is essentially a chain of logic, right? Your ability to understand logic is important. Your ability to analyze logic is very, very important. You analyze logic, that's where you find the underlying gaps, that's where you get your assumptions, strengtheners, weakeners, etc. Now, these are core skills in general. Now, let's talk about what is very, very relevant to Bullface. And those are these three: the ability to classify a statement, the ability to understand argument structure, and of course, very specific very Bullface specific answer choice analysis. As Saurabh says, there is a way to do answer choice analysis in Bullface. So we're going to discuss that as well. So let's deep dive into these specific core skills. Okay. So what do I mean by ability to classify a statement? Very, very important. As you're reading the argument, as you read each and every line of the argument, as you read each and every statement, your brain should be able to figure out whether you're dealing with a fact or whether you're dealing with a claim. That's the very broad bucket. But at a deeper level, what you're reading, is it an opinion? Is it a prediction? Is it the main point? Is it some principle that is being stated? Is it some justification for something else? As you're reading, your brain should be able to do this classification of the statements that you're reading. Very, very important for Bullface. We're going to look at this in detail. The second, and this is essentially what makes Bullface a little tricky for most of us, is the skill, the ability to understand the structure of the argument, how the author has constructed the argument, how information connects with each other. In other words, here we were talking about the role played by a certain entity. Here we are talking about the relationship between entities. So, for example, you have these bolded statements. How do they connect to the main conclusion? You have to figure it out. How do they relate to each other? How do the bolded statements, for example, relate to other conclusions, other claims made in the argument? If you're not able to figure this out, then with the tougher boldface questions, you are going to falter. So it's a very, very important core skill. Okay. Now, finally, of course, answer choice analysis, very, very specifically in boldface, you have to do this in a way that every answer choice you have to analyze. Is this the correct role? Is this the correct relationship? That's the that's the prism through which you analyze each and every answer choice. And we're going to get into that. So, if this is clear, let me give you a quick picture about why I'm so insistent on the core skills aspect, because we genuinely believe that this is where success actually comes from on the GMAT. Now, and that's why, for example, the course is structured in a certain way. If I look at our EGMAT course, now inference is, of course, the very first module that we do in CR, but it is the longest module, and there is a reason it's the longest module. Here, our objective is not to give a student brute force practice, because, like I said, brute force practice may not work for most of us. The objective is to build those necessary core skills. Now, look at this particular portion. Here we are trying to build the ability to draw inferences from a single statement. Here we are trying to build the ability to draw inferences from multiple statements, combination inferences. We are trying to build the ability to visualize the information that's given to us. Now, these are what we mean by core skills. And At EGMAT, we've focused a lot on building these core skills, and that's kind of the reason why it's one of the reasons why we are where we are in terms of the success that we've been able to deliver. Now, for example, since 2021, 60% of all verified 700 plus scores come from EGMAT, and one big reason is the core skills approach, where our course is not designed as a brute force practice tool. It's designed to help you build core skills, and that's kind of what we're talking about. So when I say 3 out of 5, I'm talking about 3 out of 5 verified scores. These are verified by the GMAT Club admin using the exact live score report link that you would send to your universities. So before, as a little bit of motivation to get into the warm-up questions that we're going to solve now, we are going to solve the first question. Here is one of the students. This is a student even I interacted with. Here's one of the students talking about Bullface. This is a guy who started with 0 in Bullface, who's not able to solve Bullface at all. By the time he absorbed the method that I'm going to discuss with you shortly, he was getting 100% in Bullface. Towards the end, his last mocks, he didn't get a single Bullface question wrong. He ended up with a 730 on the actual test. Absolute confidence with Bullface. It is possible. It's not easy, but it's also not rocket science. It's possible. Okay. So let that be a little bit of motivation as we get into our first question for the day. Okay. So we're going to get into warm up. The warm up is going to be essentially two sets. Set one has 3 questions. Set two has 2 questions. Once we're done with these three, we'll discuss that, and after that, we'll take the next 2 questions. All right. So it's time for the first question. Let's get right to it. So those of you who are here, before I get to it, can I hear a quick yes on the chat? Are you ready for the first question? For a lot of us in India, I know it's late. It's already 9 p.m., right? So I just want to know that you guys are awake, you guys are here, and you guys are motivated. All right. Thank you for that. Now, here's the question. All the best. Um, let's share the first question on the poll. Thank you. All right, folks, let's get those answers in. Most of you are done. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds for this. All right, so let's move to the next question. So, can we have the next poll on the chat? Here is the question. All the best. All right, answers are coming in. I'm going to give another 15 seconds for this one. Last 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. And let's go to the next question. Let's have the poll on the screen, rather, poll on the chat. You have the question on screen as well. All the best. All right, most of you are done. I'm going to give you another 15 seconds for this. All right, last 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. And those of you who are still waiting, take your best guess. It's that time when you should take a guess. Let's freeze this. All right, very interesting results. So let's begin discussing this at this point. So you can bring me back on screen, Sandeep. Let's discuss what's happening with these three questions. So firstly, how were these questions? Let's hear on the chat. What did you feel? Very easy? These are warm-up questions. I don't expect them to be overly difficult, but at the same time, some of them might still be difficult, provided if you don't have a solid method here, a solid understanding of what some of those elements mean. So, any quick observations on how it was for you solving these questions? Medium, okay. Got it. So yeah, um, these are not full length bullface questions, but they give you a flavor of what bullface really tests, and you'll see what I'm talking about when we discuss the questions. They're very, very precise in terms of letting you know that if you falter, this is where you faltered. Okay, so hopefully this exercise will help. Let's get right to it. Let's look at question 1 and let's read the argument carefully. Analysts expect Google to report excellent earnings. Hence, Google's stock price will go up tomorrow. Now, let me quickly first show you the results here. Around 3 of us chose this, 7 of us chose this, and 5 of us chose this. Uh, which clearly tells me that, okay, there were so many of you who could figure out that B is right, but so many of you who, even though some of you who figured out that B is right, could not figure out that A is right. So let's understand what's happening. And then there are 5 of you who thought that it is a claim. So let's kind of understand what's happening here. analysts expect Google to report excellent earnings. Now, isn't it a fact that there are these analysts, and these analysts have this expectation that Google will report excellent earnings? Now, this overall statement is what I will call a fact, but this fact contains a certain expectation, or you can even say it's the prediction of the analysts. Now, this prediction, whether Google will actually report excellent earnings or not, nobody knows. This portion is an opinion, it's their prediction, this underlined portion. But the overall statement is still a fact, right? It's a fact that there are these analysts, and it's a fact that these analysts expect Google to report excellent earnings. So, firstly, bolded statement 2, bolded statement 1, it is a fact. This part is true. Is it a fact used to back a claim? Look at the way the argument is written. You have these analysts. These analysts expect Google to report excellent earnings based on the fact that these analysts expect Google to report excellent earnings. The author makes a certain conclusion that, hey, because these analysts expect Google to report excellent earnings, Google stock price will go up, right? So while this underlined portion is an opinion, the overall sentence is a fact. The author is using the fact that the analysts expect Google to do this to make this conclusion. So is it a fact used to back a claim? Absolutely yes. Right? Most of you were able to understand that it is evidence which is provided to justify what is the main conclusion. Here there is only one conclusion, it is by default, it's the main conclusion. It is clearly evidence which is provided to justify the main conclusion. What is evidence? Evidence is basically any information used to justify a certain claim. Now, for example, if you found, let's say, if you found Raj's blood at a crime scene, this Raj's blood at a crime scene would be used as evidence to claim that Raj was a murderer or something like that, right? So is it evidence? Yes, this is a piece of evidence. It's a piece of information that is provided to justify this particular main conclusion being made by the author. A and B are both correct. The only answer choice that's incorrect here is C, because the overall statement is not a claim, it is a fact. This portion, this underlined portion, which I'm highlighting here as 1, that portion is a claim, but the overall statement is still a fact. And that's something you need to understand. So I hope this is clear. Yeah, Rishabh, exactly. The expectation is a claim. The analysts expect this thing to happen is a fact. So it's just the first question, but we saw a very strong variation in answers here. Now let's move to question number 2. Question 2 is actually very, very interesting. It says Goldman's analysts. Let's see, what role does a bolded statement 1 play? Tick all that apply. Now what you see here is the question statement. Even in this case, it's pretty much the same, right? What role does a bolded statement play? The answer choices multiple ways of writing the same thing. Here, let me explain what our answer choices were. Question 2, 5 of us chose this. I'm happy to see that almost nobody chose this, and around 12 of us chose this as well, which is great. So 12 of us were able to understand that C is right, but we were not able to understand that A is also right. So I believe it is the same problem that you saw with the last argument. Is that true? Now look at this boldface 1. Goldman's analysts expect Google to report higher than expected earnings. So again, this expectation that Goldman's analysts have, so they're predicting that Google will report higher than expected earnings. This portion is you can consider it a claim or a prediction or something, but the overall statement is a fact. It's a statement of fact. It is a fact that Goldman's analysts expect Google to report higher. So let's look at answer choice A with this understanding. It is a fact. Is boldface 1 a fact? Yes, it is. Does it specify the justification for a certain course of action? So there is this fact that Goldman's analysts expect Google to report higher than expected earnings. So these analysts have an expectation that Google will, get higher earnings than expected. Based on this expectation, it is these analysts who are making a conclusion. These analysts are therefore making a call to action. What is that call to action? They're recommending that, hey, go and purchase Google stock. So this fact does provide to us, or does specify to us, this particular opinion or prediction of the analyst, which is used as justification for the analyst's recommended course of action, which is go buy Google stock. Everybody with me on this? Oh, you didn't read that we have to take all that apply. That's wonderful. You should you should be checking that niche. For some of these questions, we do have that. But yeah. But do you guys now see why option A is actually correct? So a lot of you were able to get option C, which is fantastic. Um, but you did not get option A, which is very interesting. So did you not believe that it was a fact, or did you get confused by specifies the justification? Let me know what is it that confused you, or did you get confused by certain course of action? The logic was very, very simple. The overall bolded phase one is absolutely a fact, but it kind of gives us a certain expectation or a prediction that Google will do better in terms of earnings. Now, that is used by the analysts to justify a certain course of action, that is, go and buy Google stock. So, you see how all the pieces fit together. And the core learning is you see how easy it is to create complex answer choices. It's not giving you anything crystal clear. It is a fact which specifies a certain justification for a certain course of action, keeps going on. Option C is, of course, correct. It is a fact that presents support to a conclusion. Which conclusion is this? That's this one. That is challenged by the main conclusion. A lot of you did get this. I'm happy to see that. But essentially, the analysts say go buy Google stock. Then it is kind of challenged by the author when the author says, okay, you're asking them to go buy Google stock, but these clients, they're not likely to recognize the benefits. In other words, this is a bad recommendation. So it's a challenge to the recommendation. And to justify that, the author then explains all this, gives all this explanation. So it presents a conclusion that is challenged by the main conclusion. So I hope everybody is clear with this. I think we can move on to the next question. The next question, I actually did not expect to see so much variation here. Two of you chose this, two of you chose this, six of you chose this, which is the correct answer. I'm happy nobody chose D, but again, four of you chose this. Now, figuring out what is the main conclusion of an argument, right, is the most important, it's the primary level skill that we need to develop, not just for Boldface, but pretty much for every CR argument out there. In a complex argument, if you are struggling to figure out what is the correct main conclusion, that is a very, very important faltering point. For those of you who did not choose C, understand what's happening here. This is something you really need to put work on. You have to figure out a way to learn how to differentiate premises and conclusions, how to identify among multiple conclusions what is the author's main conclusion. That's the skill that you need to develop. Now here, Goldman's analysts expect Google to report higher than expected earning. This is a fact. Based on this overall statement, this is a fact. Eventually, based on this expectation, the analysts recommend purchasing Google stock. For those of you who chose option B is not the author's conclusion. It's the analyst's recommendation, right? It's not the author's recommendation. Option C, their clients are not likely to recognize the benefits of said recommendation. However, this is the author making a conclusion. This is the author's opinion. This is the analyst's recommendations, the analyst's conclusion. For those of you who chose option A, firstly, option A is a fact, it's not a claim, so it cannot be the main conclusion. For those of you who chose option B, you're looking for the author's conclusion, not somebody else's conclusion. Those of you who chose C, you got it right. Those of you who chose D, thankfully nobody. While it is true that Google is expected to post earnings that exceed the expectation, great. Most of that increase is already baked into Google's. This is also given to us as a fact. And if you realize, it's a fact that supports this particular conclusion. On what basis is the author saying that, boss, you're not going to get the benefit of the recommendation? Because while it is true that Google is expected to post earnings, all that is fine, but in reality, that all that increase is already baked into the stock price. You're not going to really get an increase in stock price because of this. So if you're investing in Google stocks, you're not going to get much. It is used as justification to support C. For those of you who chose option E, do you see why option E is firstly a fact, and you see how it's supporting the main conclusion? Very quick show of hands for those of you who chose E, because that's how we learn. Now you're seeing what is missing. Meanwhile, let me summarize. If you got the first question wrong, and you were not able to differentiate between facts and claims, and this, the relevant core skill you need to build is the ability to classify a statement as you read it. If you got question 3 wrong, you're not able to find the main conclusion of the argument. Again, very, very important core skill. This again falls under classification. And if I look at question 2, this is where I saw a lot of problems. This is what is called as understanding the logical structure. How does information connect with each other? Here, that boldface one is supporting a conclusion which is challenged by the main conclusion, is what you need to figure out. So, its ability to understand logical structure. Is D a fact? This is given to us as a fact. While it is true that Google is expected to post earnings, the author is saying, yeah, this is true. I agree with this. Google is expected. In this case, it is given as a fact. All right. Everybody ready for the set 2? What did you learn from this? Any quick observations? Yeah, the word expected is used, but the author is giving to us, hey, it is true that this is what it is. So, in the world of this argument, that is a fact. But what did you learn from this? Do you get a sense that okay, there are these skills that one needs to build? It's not a lot of things. A lot of people just go into boldface saying, okay, I know what the terms are. I've mugged up what these. I know what is a, what is a conclusion. I know what is evidence. Okay, I've mugged up the terms. I'll read the argument. I'll jump to answer choice analysis. Now that does not really work in most cases. It takes a lot more to do well in boldface. There are certain skills you need to develop. So you saw the example. How many of us actually faltered in identifying the main conclusion given a complex argument? That skill is fundamental. You have to develop that, for example. Now it's time for question 4. This is a set of 2 questions, and after this I'm going to introduce the method. So let's get into this. Let's have the question on screen, and all the best, you guys. Okay, most of you are done. Let's take another um, 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1, and good job. Very interesting answers. Now let's go to question 5. This is the last of the warm-ups before we get into the full-length questions. I see some of you are taking time, so I'm going to give you another 15 odd seconds for this, a little more time. All right, folks, last 5 seconds. Three, two, one, and let's hold. All right, so how were these questions? Any learnings, any understanding? The one thing that you would immediately see is, I mean, it's exactly what Nish has pointed out, right? How answer choices can be made complex. The same thing can be expressed in so many different ways, right? And that's something you would see often with Bullface. Uh, Pooja had said, I need to more work on this. Yeah, Bullface can be a little tricky, but that's why we are here to understand what we can do better. Dancing Pixie 22 also says, I have a lot more studying to do. All right. So, any quick observations before I move to the next one? What did you learn? What did you see? Oh, that's a good question, Rishabh. I can answer that. Is justification a fact? Justification, as the word suggests, and this is the beauty of boldface, right? You may not know all the terms, but you can arrive at what it means. Justification is actually anything that is used to justify a certain claim or a certain line of thought. By definition, that means justification can really be either a fact or a claim. There is no hard and fast rule that justification has to be a fact. It can be a claim also. So that's there. So let's kind of understand what's happening with this particular set of questions. Now, first, how do you guys do with question 4? Now, the correct answer and the only correct answer for this question, notice I did not have a tick all that apply here, and you wouldn't have the option to choose multiple options here. The only correct answer for this is choice C, which is chosen by around 7 of you. 3 of you chose this, 8 of you chose this. So, although at the outset this looks like a very simple enough question, this question had less than 50% accuracy. That's something that is very interesting for me. Now, let's talk about why option C is the right answer. And this is where you don't just read, you understand what the author is trying to tell you and how that information connects to each other. You have Goldman's analysts. These analysts expect Google to report higher than expected earnings. So there is a certain expectation. The analysts expect that Google will earn more than that expectation. I hope one is clear for everybody. Now look at this portion. While it is true that Google is expected to post earnings that exceed the expectation, is this not the author telling you that the author agrees with this? The author is indicating agreement here, right? 8 of you chose it is refuted in the argument. No, nowhere is the idea that Google is going to get higher than expected earnings, is going to report higher than expected earnings. Nowhere is it refuted anywhere in this argument. Uh, it's not a question of may or may not agree with. The author very clear cut indicates the agreement. So for those of you who did not choose this, just let me know what happened. What is it that you're not doing? You read this sentence, but you did not connect it with what is given earlier. You did not connect that piece of information to understand the actual structure of the argument. The author does not deny this expectation. The author tells us that, hey, this expectation is true, it is going to happen, this is how it is going to be, right? But so many of us went wrong here. So the correct answer is option C. It is expectation that Google will get higher or post or report higher than expected earnings. The author clearly indicates it is true. If you are not able to catch it, you are reading this, but your brain is not connecting it with information that you already read. Right? So I think I overlooked statement one and answered based on the second bolded part. I see a lot of us are not paying attention to question stem today, so that's again a very important learning. At EGMAT, we are very very serious about question stem. You have to pay attention to the question stem, more so in RC, but even in CR, especially in RC, so many traps are set in the question stem. If you're not paying attention, you'll go wrong. Yes, statement one is not against the main conclusion, Rishabh, and that's where it's good that you bring this out, because that clearly tells me that the understanding the logical structure skill needs improvement in your case, and that's feedback for you. That's how you learn, right? The author is not denying this expectation. The author is only denying the conclusion or the recommendation that they make based on this expectation. There's They endless say that go buy Google stock, it's good for you. The author says no, you're not going to get that kind of benefit. And then the author says, while it is true that this expectation is there, you're not going to get much out of it because of some other reason. So I hope this is clear. And you see how the argument is not a full length CR argument. If I'm from a boldface perspective, you will typically see longer arguments. The question is not overly difficult, but if you do not have that core skill of truly understanding the logical argument structure in a full length boldface question, this is exactly where you're going to falter. So I hope this is clear. Vedika, this sentence, while it is true that Google is expected to post earnings that exceed the expectation, what is the expectation? Expected earnings. Who is saying that post Google will is expected to post earnings that exceed the expectation? Analysts are having this expectation. Everything, essentially, the author in this sentence, which says, while it is true that Google is expected to post earnings that exceed the expectation, this sentence, this while it is true, if you look back at this statement, it's purely confirming that. Vedika, just take a look. So if you want to take an example, let's say expected earning is 100. Goldman's analysts say that no, you will get 150, higher than expected. Now the author comes and says, while it is true that Google is expected to post earnings that exceed the expectation, the author agrees with this sentiment that if the expectation is 100, these guys will exceed that expectation, 150, 160, 140, whatever it is. The author agrees with the sentiment stated by them. Exactly. And this is understanding logical structure. Now let's go to question 5. Now, question 5, how did you guys perform? Not bad at all. Most of you got this. There was just a small delta between people who got this but did not get this. Um, Around 3 of you were confused about this. And what you again see here is how easy is it to construct very complex looking answer choices in Bullface. But if you have a death grip on the argument, firstly the classification, whether it is a justification, whether you can call it evidence, whether you can call it fact, or in other words the role, and if you have a death grip on argument structure, how exactly do the pieces connect with each other, then you'll be able to tackle this very very easily. So what is justification? I think I already answered that. Anything used to justify a certain point, a certain claim in general. So it can be a fact or a claim. There's no hard and fast rule with justification. It could be anything. So it is a justification provided to support the main conclusion of the argument. We are talking about bolded statement 2 here. This is the reasoning to justify the main conclusion. So absolutely, this is spot on. For those of you who were able to choose B but not A, I would be very interested in figuring out why. Because B is a little more complex, in my opinion. It is a justification, yes. It's provided to support a challenge to a recommendation presented in the argument. Recommendation presented in the argument is the analyst recommendation, that is, go and buy Google stock. Now, the main conclusion here is this is not likely to be beneficial. It's a direct challenge to that recommendation. So, this direct challenge also happens to be the main conclusion. So it is a justification provided to support a certain challenge to a recommendation that's presented in the argument. All points correct, and it just so happens that this the challenge to the recommendation is actually the main conclusion, which is why A is also right. So you guys might not have been able to understand what was the main conclusion, but we already discussed that. So that's why I'm a little interested to understand why some of you were able to figure out B but not A. Do let me know. So before we go into the full length question, and more importantly, before we discuss how do we actually solve boldface questions, um, I really want to understand from you what you have learned from this so far. Is it useful? And specifically, uh, do you get that appreciation for the skills that I'm talking about? Now, I'm going to introduce the method to you. Meanwhile, I think there's a good question there. I'll take that. Nish read the question stem properly this time. That's good, Nish. Uh, Anuj, hey, justification and evidence play the same role, right? It's used to support a conclusion. Yeah, very good question, Anuj. And this is actually a very tricky point, actually. Evidence typically is factual in nature. Typically. So 90% of the time, what I've seen is evidence would be factual in nature. That's practically the only difference. Evidence is also a piece of information that is used to, support a certain claim. In reality, not too much of a difference, but usually, typically, take it with a pinch of salt. 90% of the times, evidence is factual. I don't normally expect to see evidence being non-factual. Usually, but there are some cases. For example, I could present some faulty study results as evidence, right? That there might have been a study that was conducted and that study was horrible. That the study was faulty. It is telling you some very giving you some very bad results. But I might still use those study results as evidence at some level to justify a certain claim. Now, would you consider that factual? It's slightly debatable. Just to give an example, but evidence usually factual 90% of the time. But pinch of salt, keep an open mind. Justification by definition can be anything. Absolutely no rules there. So I hope that clarifies your question, Anuj. Good question. It's a very good question. Okay. So now let's talk about the method to solve boldface questions. And some of you are EGMAT students, so you're familiar with the method. But for those of you, this would be a refresher on how to actually solve boldface questions. For the rest of you, make sure that you understand what we're doing here. Okay. Now you're going to solve the question first, and then we're going to discuss how to solve this question. All right. So let's have the poll. Let's solve the question. Let's have some fun with it. This is your first full length question of the day. All the best. Right, some of you are done. I'm going to give you a little bit more time for this. All right, folks, let's take another 15 seconds and wrap this up. Most of you are done. All right, so last 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1, and let's freeze this. Let me just document the results. We've done well overall, which is something I'm happy to see. Around, yeah, 2 by 3, 67% types accuracy for the correct answer, which is good, which means 33% of us got it wrong. That's also the other side of it. So, what's happening with this argument? How was it? Did you find it easy, difficult? Any quick thoughts before I jump in? So it's not an overly difficult question. In fact, this would be somewhere in that 650 level question. Um, so which is why what I see here, 67% accuracy kind of makes sense, reasonable. But yeah, that doesn't make it easy. Bullface in general can be tricky, especially if you're not used to dealing with such lengthy arguments and multiple conclusions, different claims, opinions. You have to find out which one is the author's. So, and then you have to figure out the logical structure. How do things connect with each other? The roles and the relationships. That's what Bullface is all about. Okay. So, uh, Rishabh says, okay, I could not find the conclusion. We're going to get into that. So, here is the method for solving boldface questions, which we believe really, really works well. Like all methods that we teach at EGMAT, nothing we teach is a hack. Everything we teach is helping you to build a skill, putting a certain process in place which is logical and methodical. We absolutely do not like doing hacks, because hacks can be broken, right? So this is a very logical approach. Pay attention. The first point is, when you're reading the argument, when you have the argument, as you're reading the argument, of course you have to understand and visualize what is being said. You have to gain an understanding of what is being said. But apart from that, while you are understanding the passage, you have to do the work of classifying the argument. Classifying, as we discussed, the at a very broad level, you have the facts and the claims bucket. At a deeper level, what is the conclusion? What is a prediction that's being made? What is a factual occurrence? What is evidence? What is justification? You need to be able to do that. Okay. Once this is done, while you're reading the argument, so while you're reading the each and every statement, you're building this understanding both of the argument and the argument logic, and you're doing this classification. Next, you have to specifically focus on understanding the logical argument structure. How is each and every sentence connecting to the main conclusion? At the end of the day, your CR argument is a set of statements which eventually connect to the main conclusion. So, figuring out the connection to the main conclusion is a very, very important step. what does each and every statement in your argument do with regard to the main conclusion. That understanding will give you a solid understanding of the logic. It will give you a solid understanding of the overall structure. How does one piece of information connect to the other to eventually give you the conclusion? You'll get that understanding here. Now, before we jump into answer choices, this is where a lot of students don't do this, but this is what will make life a lot easier in Bullface. A little bit of pre-thinking. And here the pre-thinking is about what is it that's really required. What is pre-thinking here? We need to identify the roles and the relationships of the Bullface statements. We've already figured out the roles here. Now we need to figure out the exact relationship of the Bullface statements, because that's what your answer choices are going to be. So figuring out how Bullface 1 and Bullface 2 connect to the main conclusion, figuring out how Bullface 1 and Bullface 2 connect with each other, figuring out how they connect to any other important, there might be some other very important belief or claim, figuring out how they connect to that. That is pre-thinking. Provided you do this, your answer choice elimination becomes much faster, because in through these three steps you have built a very very solid understanding of both the roles and the argument structure, the classification and the argument structure. Then answer choice analysis is very very fast. You'll run through the answer choices, you'll reject things very fast, and that's how it works. Okay, so you'll see that what I'm giving here, what I'm talking about here, these four steps that I'm talking about here, it's not a hack. It's actually mapped to a specific core skill. Your ability to classify a statement, your ability to understand a certain argument structure, and of course, your ability to analyze answer choices for Bullface very specifically. Now, let's talk about this particular argument. So, for those of you who faltered here, who struggled here, do pay attention. Stock prices of companies that exceed $100 billion in revenue. So, very, very huge revenue, right? $100 billion is not small. Also called ELCs, extremely large caps, rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. So, we are being given a certain fact about extremely large cap companies, ELCs. It's a fact. It's a fact that they barely ever beat the market in a 5-year period. It is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the overall market. Now, the overall statement is a fact. This, by the way, is exactly what we saw with the Goldman analyst example. It is a fact that Goldman's analysts have this expectation. So the overall statement is a fact, but this underlying portion is a common thought or a general belief. Is the general belief which explains why ELCs rarely beat the market. So, as per this general belief, why is it that ELCs rarely beat the market? Because they are too damn big to grow fast. They are so big, they are too big to grow faster than the market. They are so huge. That's the problem that's being given here. But this is not the author's belief necessarily. At this point, we don't know. It is a general belief. So far, so good. So, if any of you thought this was the conclusion, you're wrong. This is not the conclusion, it's just a general belief. Let's move on. We've already discussed the core point of this. Let's come to this. So we have discussed these two sentences. Let's move on. However, the minute you see a word like however, you know that some kind of a contrast is coming in. However, studies show that of the ELCs that provide higher return than the market over a 5-year period, a majority are run by their founders. So what's happening here? In general, most of these ELCs, we are given that ELCs rarely beat the market, but then we are being given a certain exception to that rule. There are some ELCs that actually are able to provide a higher return than the market. In other words, there are some ELCs that are actually able to beat the market. What are we being given about these ELCs? Among those ELCs that are actually able to beat the market somehow over a 5-year period, a majority are run by founders. Now, what does this mean? If there are, let's say, 100 companies, 95 of them are not able to beat the market. Let's say 5 are able to beat the market. What we're being given here is, out of these 5 that are able to beat the market, a majority, let's say 4, are run by founders. That understanding you should have when you go to the when you are reading this argument, reading the sentence. Okay. Now let's talk about classification. Overall, what we are being given is a fact, and of course, this boldface one that's here, it's also a fact. It's a characteristic of the exception to the rule. Companies that actually do better than the market. So far, so good. Now let's move to statement 4. Since most ELCs are run by professional management that is inherently risk averse, and you see the contrast with the previous one. You're talking about companies run by founders, but most ELCs are not like that. Most out of this 100, a vast majority, let's say 70%, 80%, 90%, whatever, a majority of these ELCs are actually run by professional management, not founders. who are inherently risk averse. That's interesting. And what is, at a classification level, what is exactly is the statement? Of course, it's just another fact about ELCs. Most ELCs, right? So since most ELCs are run by professional management that is inherently risk averse, the study is finding, what is the study is finding, by the way? This Bullface one of this entire part of the ELCs that provide higher return, majority are run by the founders. So this finding strongly suggests that. So based on the study's finding, the author is coming to a certain conclusion here. Looking at this finding, it seems to be the case that the real reason why most ELCs don't beat the market is not that they are too big to grow, but rather that they are run by professional management that is too risk averse. If you have understood the logic of all this should be clear. So the author is saying, hey, general belief is, why do ELCs not beat the market? Because they are too big. That is the general belief. The author is coming in and offering us different explanation. Real reason is not because they are too big, but because most of them are run by this professional management who are inherently risk averse, not by the founders. Because when you're looking at founders, you see such a lot of them are able to beat the market. Now I think you guys must be clear. This statement is actually the only point here which the author is giving to you as a claim. This is the author's explanation. This is the author telling you, boss, this is the real reason. This is the main conclusion. So I hope this entire aspect is clear. So now that we have understood the main conclusion, now we have run through the argument, we have done that classification. The next step is to make sure that the logical structure is very clear. How does everything relate to the main conclusion? So clearly, this explanation that's provided is the main conclusion. What is the statement? Since most ELCs are run by professional management that is inherently risk averse, clearly it is a fact that supports the main conclusion. The word since is a very good clue, right? What is Bullface 1? Bullface 1 is actually a fact that is used to justify the main conclusion. The clue is right here, for example. The study's finding strongly suggests that the author is using this finding that a majority of the such ELCs are run by founders to eventually make this conclusion. So Bullface 1 is also a fact, but more importantly, it supports the conclusion, right? And this particular statement overall was a fact, but it states a certain belief. This belief is what is getting attacked by the main conclusion. Why? This belief gives a certain explanation. I should say general belief. This belief gives a general belief, a certain explanation for why ELCs don't beat the market. Author's conclusion is an alternate explanation. It's a direct attack on this belief. This understanding is what will help you crack Bullface very easily. Now, very, very clear. Take a quick second to pre-think about the relationship of the Bullface. So Bullface 2 is first of all let's come back to this. Bullface 2 is first of all your main conclusion. That's clear. It is the real reason as per the author for why the ELCs don't beat the market. Technically, it is also the alternate explanation provided, which challenges a certain explanation that was already provided. That's all there is to it. Bullface 1 is essentially a fact which is used to support the main conclusion. You build this much of understanding in pre-thinking in seconds before you jump to answer choice analysis. Life is easier. Let me show you how. So I'm going to share the PDF with you anyway, but here is the quick analysis. So let me look at which choices were popular. One of you actually chose option choice A. Option choice A is the easiest thing to reject because is it a claim? Majority are run by the founders is actually given to us as fact. So if you faltered here, firstly, your ability to classify into facts and claims is missing. That's what is going wrong. So it's not a claim. It is a fact. So because it's a fact, the accuracy of it is never going to be in debate. It's a fact. It's considered true. This second portion was okay till here. The second is a conclusion. Yes, it is a conclusion. It is drawn on the basis of Bullface 1, but unfortunately, it's not a claim. So 3 points where you can reject this. While you're doing on the exam, the second you see that this is a claim, you will reject option choice A and move on. But while you're practicing, my advice to you, make sure that you spend the time going through every answer choice in detail, because that's how you learn and build those muscles. In the answer, you'd reject this after reading this within 3 seconds. Option choice B. The first is an objection that has been raised against a position. Again, clearly, first is not an objection. It's not objecting against anything. In fact, it is used to support the conclusion. So, objection that has been raised to is wrong. Option choice C, which is actually the correct answer. The first is evidence. Yes, it is a factual piece of evidence. It has been used to support a certain explanation that the argument favors, which in fact in this case is the main conclusion also. The second is that explanation, in other words, referring to this particular point. Perfect. Option choice D was chosen by a few of you. The first is evidence that has been used to support it. If you fell for option choice D, your problem is you do not understand the argument structure. You see that boldface 1 is actually in support of the conclusion. It's not something that is being challenged, right? You cannot say that it is evidence that is used to support an explanation that the argument challenges. No, it is used to directly support the core point of the argument, right? The second is a competing explanation that the argument favors. It is an explanation that the argument favors is true, but it's not a competing explanation. So that makes it wrong. And actually, two of you chose option choice E. And again, your problem is argument structure. If you had to do the faltering point analysis, the first is not refuting your main conclusion. It's not refuting the explanation that the argument favors, which is boldface 2. It is in line, it is used to support. And that's what you did not get, right? So if I map it to core skills, you can actually do this exercise for all the incorrect choices. If you're, for example, if you're not able to make a claim, understand that it's not a claim, it's a fact, then this accuracy of which is an issue in the argument, no. Logical structure. With regard to objection and against a position defended in the argument, again, you'll see these very specific faltering points. I'll be sharing the PDF with you. So if you're an EGMAT student, some of you are EGMAT students, where do you build these core skills from? So ability to classify a statement, you should go to the premise and conclusion file to begin with. And of course, as you go through Bullface, you will get a lot of it. And of course, Scholarinium is always available as question practice. But Scholarinium is for practice. The course files for you are for building these core skills. So if you're not able to relate how every piece of information connects to the main point, then all your CR argument-based questions will help build that skill. Premise and conclusion, even assumption for that matter, strengthen, weaken, boldface, all of them will help you. Relating bold to boldface questions, you specifically need boldface practice. Again, understanding how information connects with each other. Scholarinium will also help you. And answer choice analysis, as you go through the course, you're going to build this to a solid level. Now, I think we're running out of time because there is another session on this channel at 10:30. So I'm going to give this for you as homework. We will share the PDF with you. So don't worry. And if you have questions, you can always reach out to us. But if you enjoyed what you saw here, if you learned something useful, and you feel that you want to explore EGMAT a little further, I invite you to our strategy session that's coming up. Now, when I say strategy, I'm talking about GMAT preparation strategy. How do you build a solid study plan for your target score? What kind of things should you keep in mind? When should you study? What kind of consistency do you need? How many hours do you need to put in? A lot of open points exist in students' minds about these aspects. You can get a lot of clarity about these aspects through this session. And this Sunday we have a geometry session. And if you're wondering, this is me. The slightly smiling face is me. So if you want to come for my geometry session, I invite you for that as well. We're going to specifically discuss quadrilaterals. And you're again going to see something very specific. The focus is not on the conceptuals of quadrilaterals. You probably know that already. The focus is on a process or a logical approach to help you solve questions in geometry in a consistent way, right? And if you like the idea of having a standardized process, a logical approach to solving such questions, this session is for you. Okay, so we're going to skip this for now. I'm going to run through this because I do understand that there is a time crunch. But let me summarize very quickly everything that we have discussed so that, I'm going to put it all in one thing for you, in one space for you. First, remember, if you learn boldface well, boldface is a tricky boldface is a tricky question type. But if you learn it well, it is going to improve your ability with other question types. So put a little bit of effort here to really master this. It will help you. It will pay dividends in other places. It will even help you with RC. It's my personal experience. The second point I want you to remember, if you really follow a methodical approach, boldface can be solved accurately and efficiently. Accurately, I'm sure you guys have absolutely no doubt. Where will the efficiency come from? You have to get comfortable with building these skills. These are hacks. These are not hacks. These are skills. So it takes time to build. But once you put in the requisite amount of effort, you will start seeing efficiency. Initially, you will take 3.5 minutes to solve a boldface question. by the time you solve even 20-25 questions, your time will come down to 2. You will see efficiency and accuracy at the same time. What are the core skills in CR? I have provided the list here for your reference. Very specifically, Boldface has these elements as well, which you need to be careful about. Okay, we've kind of discussed what the core skills are. As you're reading, you should be able to do this classification. You should be able to understand how information connects with each other, especially for the bolded statements and answer choice analysis. You're essentially figuring out, is the role correct, is the relationship correct for each and every this one. And you got a glimpse of how to do that as well. Remember the process. I already detailed it. While you're reading, do the classification, then spend some time figuring out how information connects to the main conclusion, then specifically focus on the boldface relationships, and then only then jump to answer choice analysis. Don't just read and jump to answer choice analysis. It will not always help you, especially as questions get tougher. Okay, so that's it from my end. To summarize, if any of you want to see some of our success stories, here are a couple of them. These should be clickable links. You should be able to see them as well, and some of the reviews that we have. So this is somebody who went from 600 to 760, and he talks about what it really took. That entire journey is kind of detailed out, and it's good to learn from people who have been in our shoes, in the same shoes as you. So that's there. Uh, that's about it from my side. We've kind of discussed this. I hope the session was useful for you. Let me know any feedback or anything that you'd like to understand. So the PDF has been shared. Yeah, Felix, I think the PDF has been shared just above what you told me. I think Anuj, your question has been answered. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Kanapriya, for that. Okay. Anything else, guys? I would love to hear from you what exactly you learned from the session. Thanks a lot, Nish, for that, and thanks others as well. If there's one thing I want you to take away, the the main takeaway is the takeaways. I would say first thing, don't just read the argument and run to your answer choices. There is a lot that has to happen in between. There is this processing. You need to understand the logical argument structure. You need to understand what exactly the bullface is doing. If you do that, your answer choice analysis will be quicker and smoother. That's one point. And wherever you're studying from, when you solve a question, spend some time analyzing that question, see where you're faltering. So I gave you a glimpse into how you can do that analysis also. If you've thought it was a claim, you are not doing the classification right. If you're not able to figure out whether it is supporting or refuting, then it's a different problem. You're just not figuring out argument structure. So you can, as you solve questions, you can build your error log, you can see at a skill level what is it you're missing, and then you can take remedial action for it. If you're an EGMAT student, you know where to go. And if you're confused about it, you can reach out to us. And even otherwise, wherever you're studying from, figure out where you're faltering and then fix it. That's the way to success, especially in Bullface. Okay. So I think that's it from my side. Thanks, Nish. Thanks, Rishav. Thank you, Anuj, Felix, and anyone else. With that, as I always say, happy learning. I think we can wrap this up. Thank you. See you next time.